Hi everyone, William here. I'm out in the evening today. I think yesterday it was much earlier and warmer. It's a bit cold, but that's all right. This is the Grand Duke Dmitri YouTube series. We do diaries and letters, and we are getting close to the end of this long letter that Dmitri wrote to his sister on the 23rd of September 1939, after being 3 weeks at Sanatorium Château, which is where I'm at, as you know if you've watched previous videos. So, as I say, we're very near to the end of the letter. We're going to do a big chunk of it today, and then we'll finish up in the next installment. So, our recap for the previous section of the letter. Dmitri was and still is in a very good mood while writing this letter, and he was talking about both the good news he'd gotten about being apparently having a very strong heart and a very strong constitution. That's what he'd been told by the doctors. And also that he considered himself to be in a good position because of his mystical view of things, and that was helping or would help toward his healing, and so much so that he insists that the doctor, although the doctor didn't mention it explicitly, the doctor noticed that he had this sort of power is the wrong word, he's not claiming that, but this kind of, I don't know, mystical connectedness that was helping him. And then there was a very touching scene where he got out of bed in the middle of the night, went out on the balcony, looked at the beautiful night view, went back in, got down on his knees, and gave thanks to the one I call God. And I didn't talk about that yesterday, his designation of the one I call God. This is, I think, primarily going back to his New Thought reading. And in other places, he calls God the infinite power. And so, on the face of it, it's definitely not orthodox, but, it's hard to piece together at that point in his life where he was at spiritually. And we'll get some hints of it from diary entries while he was here, but he definitely had an Orthodox funeral anyway. An Orthodox priest came from Zurich to conduct his funeral, and whether that Orthodox priest visited him before he died, right before he died, when obviously he wasn't keeping a diary, I don't know. Anyway, let's dive into the new letter section. And remember, the word sauna is not S-A-U-N-A. It's not a steam bath. It's the abbreviation that was used for sanitarium by the patients. When I arrived at the sauna, they put me on a scale, of course, and I ended up weighing 60 kilograms, 0.700 in my pajamas. The next week passed, and I was called downstairs for a medical exam. One has such exams once a week. I was already much better, spitting less, etc., but I weighed 59 kilograms, 0.500. The doctor calmly remarked, "I thought so. I'll come talk to you today!" Exclamation point. He arrived, and this is exactly what he said to me! Exclamation point. When I first arrived at the sanatorium, I looked horrible. Then he puts in parentheses, the doctor said all this. And then in quotation marks, "I was just terrified for you. The disease was still in the beginning stage in the right lung with an ugly hole, and the left had the kind of cavity that one simply has to stare at and remove one's hat. But in the course of 1 week, you have made un cure remarkable. Forget it. That's not Dmitri saying forget it, that's me. It turns out that I have had this disease for at least 6 or 7 years. When a case has become as serious as mine, it means that over the years, the stuff I brought up every day in the morning infected me, and woke up the microbes that all people have in their bronchi. And then one develops a secondary and very virulent inflammation. That's why in London and in April at the Mikhailovs, I complained so much about pain in my bronchi on both sides. So the doctor said, and he puts quotes, "We will give you creosote as a disinfectant." And then Dmitri puts in parentheses, "Even railroad ties are treated with creosote." Okay, he injects me with it. And I also take 3 capsules of calcium per day by mouth and receive some kind of calcium injections directly into a vein. And to fight the infection in my bronchi, they give me inoculations of auto vaccine. Finally, for stimulating the chest, I get mustard plasters every other day, 20 minutes front and back. When I asked why I had lost weight here at the sanatorium, he took my hand and said, "It's nothing. You'll start gaining. The weight loss is normal. There's a reason why the English word for this disease is consumption." As it turned out, at my second checkup a week later, I had gained a kilo and my chest was so much better that he called in 2 assistants so that they could look me over too. Double exclamation points. Okay, so his weekly exam he had, and this is rather shocking when he says that he weighed, 60 kilograms, 0.700, and then it went down to 59. That is emaciated. That's between 131 and 133 pounds, which is, and he was over 6 feet tall. So that's skin and bones. That's the sort of thing where you look at the person and think, well, a week from now, this guy will be dead. So, I don't know what Maria was thinking or the other people around him were thinking about not just taking him in hand and to a hospital or or to a sanatorium. Anyway, the funny thing is that he will end up by 1940, the end of 1941, he'll end up being rather heavy. I mean, I say that, he wasn't a little overweight probably. So that's amazing. He did have this strong constitution. Something the doctor should not have done. He should not have told Dmitri, "I disguised your prognosis from you. Oh, I looked at you and I thought, this guy's so far gone that he's just going to die. He has this kind of giant cavity in one lung that is, you don't survive that." So, don't tell a patient that, because then whenever you tell them something positive, they're not going to believe you. Because, Dmitri would soon start having setbacks, but the doctor would keep saying, "Oh no, you're getting better, there's nothing wrong." And, it would really end up being agonizing for him, as you'll see, because he no longer believed what Dr. Maurer told him. He thought that Dr. Maurer was sugarcoating, and Dr. Maurer was sugarcoating. So that was not a good idea. It probably overall it caused him more anguish than it gave him peace of mind. But doctors were that way back then. They were very sort of paternalistic. Okay, so his left lung had this, was it the left? Yeah, had this huge cavity. Yes, definitely not a good indication. And then he tells us, well, he told us in the previous part of the letter that he'd been coughing stuff up every morning for about 10 years. And now he's saying, I thought the doctors had told him he'd probably had TB for 10 years, but now he says that it was 6 or 7 years at least, so it could have been 10 years, but it definitely wasn't, going back to pre-revolutionary times anyway. So I keep getting, messages. That's why I'm a little preoccupied. I've gotten like four now, and that almost never happens to me. I picked a bad time to do this, I guess. So yeah, this is, I'm sure, true that he has this secondary infection. Somewhere in the diaries he refers to it as gangrene. But yeah, this was not at all common to have these secondary infections. TB itself being the primary infection. And, you know, I think about him spitting stuff up for 10 years and thinking even before he had TB, he must have had chronic bronchitis, from just being a chain smoker from the time he was probably 17 years old. He asked to be allowed to start smoking on his 16th birthday, and he wasn't allowed to, but I would guess probably when he was 17 he was. Anyway, he refers to this doctor in London that I think was Dr. Perrott, Perrott, that I found out about partly because Dr. Perrott sent a done notice to Maria because Dmitri owed him money, and he said he didn't want to bother Dmitri since Dmitri was so gravely ill, so he sent that letter to Maria, and Maria just sent it to Dmitri's secretary in Paris. Presumably, it eventually got paid. And then he refers to Mikhailov, this doctor, who was sort of looking after him when he was in the south of France. Okay, so then we have this fascinating the details of the treatment he was getting. And the funny thing is that these were all outdated treatments. Here he was at a TB sanatorium that was considered, the top of the heap. And the doctor, Gustav Maurer, was a brilliant surgeon, and was pioneering his own surgical techniques. But he was a very eccentric man, and an abrasive man with his colleagues. He had this huge ego, and he wanted to come up with his own cure for tuberculosis. And so when the antibiotics were found that could cure tuberculosis, he just couldn't deal with that. He ended up killing himself. But anyway, in the meantime, he was, instead of going right in and doing surgery, and he was a surgeon, he does this sort of strange treatment regimen for Dmitri, the first being injections of creosote, which is, as Dmitri rightly says, is what you use or used to treat wooden railroad ties. And he's having this injected into his veins. And I had to look that up to see, it's definitely not helping, but is it actually hurting him? Is it making him worse? And apparently it could, if you got enough of it, it could. And apparently the injections were quite painful and made you nauseated. Well, Dmitri is just not going to complain. He's in this positive state of mind. But anyway, that's an alarming thing to do to someone, inject them with something that you use, for industrial purposes. No doubt it kills the infection, but it might kill the patient too. The other thing was also dangerous. Not that he was given calcium capsules, but that he was given injections into the vein, as he puts it, and that was also dangerous. That could cause all kinds of problems. I should have written those problems down because they're pretty gruesome, and now I can't remember what they were. So he's getting capsules, he's getting these injections into the vein, and none of those are the capsules, sure, but the injections and the creosote, those are not good, responsible treatments. The idea of the calcium was to aid the immune system in walling the tuberculosis bacilli off in these calcium capsules. Okay, so the next thing he was getting was what he calls an auto vaccine, which was tuberculin, and that was a kind of inoculation. And it was, I think it's still, its main use was, I don't think it still is, as a diagnostic, because if you put it, under the skin superficially and the person was infected with tuberculosis, then you get this red welt that shows. But yeah, anyway, they're injecting this into him. And tuberculin had caused a lot of problems. It had, in some cases, it had accelerated the course of tuberculosis and killed people. But, so nobody was using it in 1939. Maurer was using it. So there we go. And next were the mustard plasters, and the mustard plasters, I think, were harmless, but they were probably not helpful. I don't know. That was, I think, yeah, just for the chest discomfort. The creosote was for the co-infection, the secondary infection. The calcium was to help the immune system, and the tuberculin as well. Any one of those things could have killed him. Well, not the mustard plasters, but if they'd gone too far. And he will talk about a negative reaction that he has from the creosote. He'll talk about that later. But anyway, I wonder, since, Maurer was a surgeon and had the mindset of a surgeon, I wonder if he looked at Dmitri and thought, well, I can't do surgery on him, not even with a local anesthetic, because he won't survive it. So maybe he thought this is the only way to, keep him from dying immediately, sort of thing. So he took a chance, and it worked. So there you go. And then he's so amazed that he brings these two assistants in, so that, as Dmitri says, so they could look me over too, because it was, he puts it in French. He spoke French to Dmitri. What did he call it? Yeah, a remarkable cure. Un cure, well, you heard me try to pronounce it once. Okay, so what next? I think Dmitri was actually a little pleased that they were treating him with something that was used to treat railroad ties, because he loved railroads, but good Lord, creosote. What do we have next time? Well, we're going to finish it up, and we're going to find out more about his treatment and what he thinks about it, and what he's doing about his lifelong smoking habit, and then we'll be finished up with this letter. All right, and some more, one of his little imaginary dives into what the people back in France, his friends back in France, must be saying about him. All right, I hope to see you then. Bye.